turn your light on or not? Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We've got a lot to do, and supposed to take in at 11 o'clock, so we're going to get going. I'm going to go ahead and take up the budget first and move through that. Then we've got three bills that we want to consider today as well. So if you'll indulge me, I think we'll go ahead and get started on the budget. The FY 2012 amended budget is before you on your desk. By the way, has every member of the Appropriations Committee got a copy of the budget? You should have a copy of the budget, and you also should have a list of items from that budget to help you identify anything you want to look at. So those two things you should have. You may not have an agenda, but we're running one off for you. The agenda has been posted previously. The amended 2012 budget totals $18.5 billion, which is actually now, today, only slightly above the 2012 general budget. Before we discuss the amended budget, let me show you some numbers to help put it in perspective. And I've got a chart, if you can bring up the chart on the screen. And this is the chart out here as well. This is month by month showing as we've tracked the budget, the revenue estimate all year, and there is, in fact, as of yesterday, a reduction in the revenue estimate for 2012 by the governor, some $47 million. We have reflected that revenue change so that you can now see that it seems pretty doable to go ahead and make revenue estimate for the rest of the year, about 4.4%. As you know, December was down slightly, and January was slightly up, but between the 2 months, which are two of the four best months of the year, were really flat. So the governor yesterday issued a letter reducing the revenue estimate for 2012 by some $47 million. This chart shows reflects that, and it shows, I think, now the dotted line, which is where we need to be to meet the budget. I think that's and the yellow line is last year. I think that shows we can do that. The second chart will show you this is the appropriations in the 12 budget, amended budget, and it shows you at the top motor fuel funds and lottery, some 8%, $32.2 million. The statewide changes, and I'll explain a little bit more about those in a few minutes, but that's some $65 million, about 16% of the amended budget. Enrollment growth for K-12 and filling deficits, some $225 million, 57%, and any adds that we'll touch on when we discuss the budget totals really only $74 billion. About 19%. So that's where the amended budget spends those funds different from the 2012 general budget. The second chart will show where these funds came from. Basically at the top you've got motor fuel and lottery, the same figure obviously that we brought in, we spent. Agency cuts, some $189 million, 48%. Revenue growth, about 2%, and this there again reflects the revenue reduction from the governor. So we're basically back where we started. Generally speaking, we're back where we started with the 2012 general budget. And then the yellow shows the revenue shortfall reserve withdrawal for K-12, $165 million. That's some 42% of the funds that we received for the K-12 for the amended 2012 budget. So I think that helps put it in perspective for you that this is a budget that doesn't have a tremendous number of items in it and changes. The things that we've addressed, both the House and the Senate and the governor, have all been necessary pretty much. There are very few adds that are any new funding at all. It's a very make-do kind of a budget that I want to salute the governor and his staff and the House and their staff as well, the leadership over there. We've had a pretty lean set of years the last 4 years, and as you compare our processes to anywhere in the country, I don't think you'll find any state that's more attuned to following business-like procedures in our state, and I think an attribute and certainly a salute to the leadership of this state. Let me also say that I salute the governor for taking a proactive stance on revenues. We've been in uncharted waters for a few years now. We had an unprecedented decline in revenues, and we're still at the same level in revenues as we were in about 2005. So even though we've had some 18 months of growth, which ended in December with that drop in the revenues in December, the truth is we're still about where we were some 2 years ago as far as revenues, and we are certainly nowhere near we were 4 or 5 years ago before the recession. So while we are making recovery, that recovery is slow, and I think that even the budget now as adjusted is still some $2 billion under where we were in 2009 under that proposed budget as well. So I salute the governor for being proactive and not waiting any longer than the signs were apparent that we needed to make a change. You'll see throughout the budget statewide changes. These are changes that apply to every department, and we won't touch on those unless you have a question. Those include the state health benefit plan increases that total over $270 million of the $3 billion state health insurance program, which covers core state employees and retirees. These increases are simply due to the rising cost of health care for both active and retirees, and certain shortages that are due to the implementation of the national health insurance as we're moving into the implementation of that. Secondly, you'll see adds and cuts throughout the budget based on usage of technology from the Georgia Technology Authority by agencies. Senate version has added back some $4.5 million to a couple of agencies that we believe were in the swapping back into may have been shorted inadvertently. That's in Human Services and Department of Revenue. As I mentioned earlier, you have a copy of the amended budget before you, but you also have an extensive listing of the items in that budget. Showed that to you here. You can take that by section and see the change. You can, in some cases, it's a change from what the House had or the governor had. In some cases, it's an add. It'll be clear on there. We'll have an item number that you can look up in the budget. That seems to me an easier way than trying to go through the budget line item by line item. And there again, they're really outside of 4 or 5 things. They're just different cosmetic, really only cosmetic changes between the House and Senate version as well. Let me just take a minute and touch on some of the areas where we agreed with the House and in some cases with the House and the governor with his recommendation as well. Among these are $10 million in new funds for rural economic development through the One Georgia program. Of course, I mentioned earlier, fully funded the enrollment growth in K-12 formula with $85.9 million going to the QB formula. We agreed with the House to fund charter system grants growth of some $2.8 million. In behavioral health, we agreed to provide funding of $250,000 to Opening Doors to Recovery project, and that was a one-time add, and then to the Sidney Marcus Autism Center, another $250,000. We agreed with the governor and the House to restore the 0.5% provider cut passed last year in Medicaid, aged, blind, and disabled, low-income Medicaid, and Peach Care. We agreed to increase the nursing home provider fee in Medicaid, aged, blind, and disabled, and to use the reimbursement to reflect the 2009 cost reports. That's a $20.6 million item. We agreed with the governor and the House to add $2.3 million to Peach Care for a provider rate increase to compensate for the number of children who are now eligible to be covered by Medicaid who were previously covered by the state health benefit plan. The state, of course, saves money because it's certainly cheaper for them to be covered by Medicaid than by the state health benefit plan. So those numbers of children that are being transferred, we didn't feel like that providers who may be making a lower rate under the Medicaid plan, this holds them harmless by continuing to serve those children of state employees. We restored partially and agreed with the House to restore partially the Mercer and Morehouse Schools of Medicine program cuts. We agreed with the governor and the House to add $5.5 million to the Department of Corrections. In fact, of the ads that we showed up there, 11 million of, well, actually more than that, $14 million or so are in the Department of Corrections for 3 different items. One of those is to add $5.5 million for the county jail subsidy to aid counties in taking care of state prisoners. We also agreed with the House and the governor to fund $6 million to renovate the Bostic facility, and this is a facility where medically fragile inmates who are high-cost inmates in the prison system, many of whom are convicted of sexual-type diseases or sexual-type crimes and can't just be paroled anywhere. This Bostic facility will be a facility will be privately run, but owned by the state, but privately run, where we can parole inmates who are medically fragile, get them off the state cost, and get them on Medicaid if they qualify. So we think that's a move that will remove some very expensive inmates, and the $6 million will help to renovate that Bostic facility in Milledgeville. We agreed to fund $4.6 million to convert 3 pre-release centers to residential substance abuse treatment centers in the Department of Corrections for additional 600 beds. We agreed with the House to increase to $500,000 funds for fuel for the State Patrol. That's an increase over what the governor had recommended. In the Department of Public Health, we agreed to $1.2 million to hold harmless counties that are losing under the new grant and aid formula. There's a plan that will stage in the new formula, and there's a set of counties that are big losers, and the plan is to drop those down, I think 15% a year. This funds that and helps keep those counties held harmless for this year with a 15% cut. We agree with the House to appropriate some $982 million, and you may have heard about the prior year motor fuel funds that were recovery funds from the federal government for projects. They're obligated already for projects around, but because we've changed the program budgeting, they were trapped, I guess would be one word, and need to be appropriated. So the governor had appropriated partially an amount. The House went to full $982 million. We agreed with that figure. We made a slight change in how some $25 million of those funds are spent. But this includes funding for the Northwest Corridor and local road improvements as well, some $982 million in prior year motor fuel funds. We agreed with the governor and the House to accept a cut of $3.9 million from the technical college system for savings in closing underutilized facilities and branches. Of course, there were a few items where the Senate either disagreed with the House or changed the line item. The Senate restored a cut of $200,000 that the House made to REBA funds, which are, of course, deal-maker funds that are actually housed in DCA but are used by the Department of Economic Development and deal-maker funds. Of course, right now is a very critical time in economic development. We've just seen an incredible announcement over the last week of new industry, and what we are told is that the pipeline is there's a lot of interest by companies in Georgia right now. We want to be sure that we continue to give our agency the funds that they need to bring new jobs to Georgia. We disagreed at adding funds to round off co-payments for Medicaid recipients, round them off to $1. We disagreed with that and took that out. We removed an ad by the House of $7 million in equalization payments and suggested through our subcommittee process a 2-year phase-in instead. That'll be obviously a subject for discussion. The House has passed a new equalization formula that resizes the equalization down to the amount of money that we're actually having to appropriate. So I'm sure that will be a topic of discussion. It did seem like a 13 issue rather than a 12 issue, but I know the House, this was part of their actions to pass the bill on equalization, and I understand that concern. We changed the House ad for unfunded salary supplements for new science and math teachers. The House had put in both 11 and 12. It's customary, we believe, and to fund these the following year after they have served that year. So we funded 11 but left 12 with the obligation and the commitment to fund 2012 in the 2013 budget. The Senate added $3.8 million for the virtual state charter schools that received no local funds and were not included in the funds that the governor had put in the budget for other state schools, state charter schools. The Senate also added $1.2 million for newborn screening under the Children First program due to the loss of TANF funds. The Senate added $2.5 million to the Department of Revenue, as I mentioned earlier, for shortfalls in GETS telecommunications bills, and added $2 million for the same purpose in human services as well. I mentioned the $982 million in DOT that under the prior year fuels funds. The one change we did make in the appropriation of those funds was to create a $25 million economic development infrastructure fund to be used as somewhat of a deal maker funds to provide infrastructure for new economic development projects. So that's a change from the House version. The total is the same. This is just a new line item as well. The governor, I mentioned, lowered the revenue estimate and took the funds by reducing the CMO payment by $82 million, and at the same time moved some $35 million to Medicaid benefits cuts to restore those funds for cash management. So that pretty much covers some of the big changes. I would be, if you've looked over the amended Senate version talking points and would like to ask any questions or anything else, I'd be happy to go back and revisit it. But we wanted to give you what we thought were the highlights, and then go ahead from there. So at this time, I'll open the floor for questions or comments. Okay. Senator Mullis.
Mr. Chairman, if there are no questions, I move to pass when you're ready for that motion.
Well, thank you. Let's give it a minute and see if we've got some questions. I certainly don't want to close debate on anything that's important. I've seen years, as Senator Hooks has, I've seen years where there are millions of dollars added for all sorts of projects, but this is not one of those years. Sure. Questions, comments? Well, between now and Thursday when we'll do this on the floor, if you've got questions or concerns, I hope you'll bring them to me or to Jason. And while I mention the Senate Budget and Evaluation Office, let me do something I should have done at the very top of the presentation and thank the members of the Appropriations Committee for your hard work in this budget process. You know, everybody has another job in the Senate. When you work on appropriations, you have other jobs and other responsibilities. The subcommittee chairs all have other responsibilities. So working all of this out is an additional duty. I mean, I really appreciate the seriousness with which you take it and the hard work that you put in. And I just want to thank the subcommittee chairs and the others on the committee for what you've done. And of course, our fine budget staff, Jason Fernandez and our Senate Budget and Evaluation Office, who always do a great job. All right, I see no questions, see no lights on. We have a motion from Senator Mullis, do pass. Have several seconds. All in favor of the FY 2012 amended budget passing as amended by the Senate, please raise your hand. All right, and all opposed? I see no votes. Bill passes out, and I appreciate your cooperation. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We have 3 bills we're going to take up this morning as well. We're going to begin with House Bill 760. Representative Coleman, this is on capital outlay. Representative Coleman, you want to come up and take the podium? Should be a copy of the bill in your folder, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. Glad to have you. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Senate. I have with me today, if I could, to answer questions if you have them, Christine Murdoch, y'all know with our budget office, and Lynn Jackson with the that handles capital outlay for the State Department. So they'll be here if there are questions that I can't answer, and I'm sure there are plenty of them. So, but I appreciate it. Today I'm here to present to you House Bill 760. And I want to say, first of all, as you remember, most of you, that we passed a piece of legislation last year that created a QBE Finance Study Commission that was to work for 2 years. It would be co-chaired by Senator Miller, and I would be co-chairing this committee to look at QBE, to look at education financing in the state. And this year our goal was, that was specified in legislation, was to look at the low-hanging fruit and to bring to the governor, which we did, and then to the legislature, some pieces of legislation that would address various items in the budget we needed to address in this study. We had 4 subcommittees. One of the subcommittees was chaired by Senator Hill there. He chaired one looking at the QB formula. Representative England chaired one that looked at this bill we'll be looking at here. And Superintendent of Schools chaired one. And the other was chaired by Kelly Henson with the looking at special programs that fit into the QBE formula. We met about 35 times, 5 times as a full committee and probably 31 times as subcommittees in developing recommendations for the Senate and for the House to look at this year. And you have here the 3rd piece that we passed in the House. This is the first piece I think you've seen, and this is the QBE, or to looking at the capital outlay program in the state. And I want to talk to you about this. This piece of legislation does basically 6 things. I will go by the bill line by line if you want me to, but I'm going to give you the 6 things it does, and then if you want any more specifics, I'll be glad to do that. But what this legislation does is, number 1, in the capital outlay program that was started in '77 to help schools build facilities, remodel facilities, renovate facilities, we decided to put that in, and we funded it in 1981. It was found at that time, that was called the regular entitlement, that there was a 5-year plan that systems had to do, and at that time our information system was not too good, our data collection system was not too good, and those programs were there every 5 years. We only update them every 5 years. But now, with the information system we have, we're updating those programs daily. We're dealing with real-time data. We lop off a year and add a year every year, so we have real-time data that we're looking at. But years ago, when we didn't have that, we felt that systems were growing, like the Gwinnett's, the Cobb's, the Cherokees, the Fultons, and they needed some way to help these build facilities, so they put in what they called exceptional growth capital outlay money. They had the regular fund and they had the exceptional growth. They also felt that some of our poor systems, they needed a little help, so they put in what they call the advanced funding to give them a little loan and help them to build it when it took them so long to get their funds. And they also added what we called a low wealth system for the systems that were poor and it took years to just get enough money to renovate a bill. So that's what we had. So in looking at these, we felt like it was outdated, and here's what we're recommending. Number 1, we're recommending to eliminate the exceptional growth program. The reason for that is we have real-time data now, and we only had, I think it was 16 systems apply for that in the last couple of years, so there really is not the tremendous need that we've had before. And a reason for that is exceptional growth money can only be used to build facilities. And many of these systems like Cherokee, Fulton, Cobb, Gwinnett, needing to renovate now. They don't need to build new ones, they need some money to renovate, and that money couldn't be used for that, so they didn't apply. So here's what we're recommending. There's $100 million that in that fund, we're recommending thing, that $100 million that we asked for that fund to have, that this program, that money be rolled into the regular entitlement, which stands today at $200 million, and that would give us a $300 million entitlement there for schools to use. They can use that money for building new facilities, renovations, modifications, whatever they need, so it gives them a lot more flexibility to do that. In doing this, we have about 7 or 8 systems that we call losers, but they actually aren't losing a lot. They're losing a little. Fulton County, Forsyth County, but they will pick it up the following year. They will pick it up when we go into the regular growth, but it will not hurt them. Matter of fact, the Forsyth County superintendent was on our commission, thought it was a great idea, and I met with the Fulton County superintendent, which thinks it's a good idea to go ahead and do it this way. So that's what the first thing we do. The second thing this bill does, if you follow along with me in the bill, it increases the regular allotment, as I said, from $200 million to $300 million, and every school system participates in the regular program, but at the current $200 million cap, the current program is not as effective as it could be in meeting all the needs. Increasing this cap to $300 million, it benefits all schools to build and to renovate. The third thing it does, it tightens requirements for advanced funding. The program provides interest-free loans by allowing school systems to borrow against future entitlements. This program was designed initially to help smaller, poorer systems that would normally take years to accumulate enough entitlement for the project. However, what happened is always happened. Some of the larger systems saw a way to get a hold of some of this advanced funding, and they were gobbling up the money, which could not help the smaller systems, so we're taking care of that in that one so that it goes to the systems that need it. The fourth thing it does, and I think is very critical, for about 24% of our school systems, it expands the eligibility of low-wealth programs. Systems that are truly low-wealth cannot afford 2 projects at a time. Yet, that is a current requirement of the low-wealth program, that they have 2 programs going. Many of them can't even have 1 going. This legislation also modifies eligibility criteria so that those systems at the bottom of the sales and property tax wealth, FTE, or those systems with very low SPLOST earnings are eligible. The state maintains the criteria now that you must level 12 mills to do it. That's a current law. We want them to have that. We want the local participation and to show that they're trying themselves or the equivalent to participate in the program. The fifth thing it does, and I think this is important, it codifies the process whereby the State Department of Education can advance funds to systems that need help immediately due to natural disaster. If you remember a couple of years ago, Clarksdale and Ringo had that disaster. Did you know we could not give them money to build their schools? Of course, they had their insurance, but it wasn't enough. They needed some advanced funding. This allows us to go ahead and give them the money in natural disasters where they can go ahead and do that. And the last thing, ladies and gentlemen, that it does, this, much like House Bill 706, that you'll be getting in a few days, that we're eliminating many items in Title 20, trying to clean up Title 20. This eliminates some obsolete language and outdated language that is no longer needed in the capital outlay program. So basically, ladies and gentlemen, that's what it does, and I'll be glad to answer any questions you may have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have a question. Let's see. Is that Senator Thompson? Is that your line? You have a question? Okay, you're on. Yeah. Oh.
First thing the majority leader's done for me in a while. Sure it won't be the last. I said for me, not to me. Let me ask you, Representative, on the summary sheet that we have, and this is House Bill 760, correct? House Bill 760, is that correct?
Yes, sir, 760.
Okay. All right, and on the, it's not in the bill, but on the explanation of the summary sheet, there's a language allows a local school system to request a redirection of bond funds from a project not yet started, which full reimbursement has not been requested. Is that because they are general obligation funds that they can, GO bonds that they can do that, and the state board will be able to allow them to redirect it? Is that the reason for that?
You may ask Lynn. Lynn, could you answer that?
we talking about the natural disaster?
You're talking about the natural disaster funds? Is that what you're talking about? That's what we're trying to decide. Yes, yes.
It's not natural disaster.
Where?
Oh, yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Yes, sir.
To another capital.
Yes, sir.
That's exactly what it is.
Yes, sir. We're allowing that. That's what I thought. That's what you're saying. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. That's it. Yeah. I thought so. That's what.
Did your answer satisfy your question? Okay. Okay. Thank you, Senator. Okay. Other questions? Y'all need to know, some of you through the years have worked with Lynn Jackson. She's the facilities, whatever her title is over. If you want to talk about buildings, DOE, she's the person you go talk to. She's retiring this year, and one of the things in the military they always said was you can't retire till you find your replacement. So she's found her replacement, and he's here. Don't want to meet him, but Lynn, we appreciate your hard work over the years. She has really helped a lot of school systems over the years to find a way to build the projects they needed. I think we have another question. Senator Hooks, your line.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative, for your hard work on this. It sounds like a step in the right direction. If you would, go over the low wealth capital outlay grants again slowly.
Yes, sir.
And let me give you an example. Many of the counties down our way don't have any two projects going at the same time. They do good to have one.
Yes, sir.
1 mil of tax in one county down our way equals just $72,000.
Yeah.
So you can imagine we go to the 20 mil cap, we still don't have anything to do any capital outlay with.
Yes, sir.
So tell us how this will.
Yes,
speed
Senator. You
along.
know, as I've traveled the state over, I've been in every system in the state. It's amazing some of them that they've tried for years and cannot get that. So what this does, help me out, Lynn, to be sure. Systems that are truly low wealth, they can't afford, it says now they got to have a project ongoing and to apply for another. And they can't even get one project going, so we eliminate that. All right. All right, that's what it does. It's striking that language, you got to have two projects. This legislation also modifies the eligibility criteria so that those systems at the bottom of the sales tax, let's say Pelham City, I think 1 mil generates 33,000 or something, you know, where they, in property wealth, those systems with the very slow splash earnings, they're eligible. If your splash earnings or your FTE qualifications are low, you qualify, which is not the case at the present time. Is that correct?
It's not.
And so we need to allow them. So there, that takes care of the Pelham cities, those that have very low wealth. And the state maintains, now we're keeping the criteria that you've got to levy 12 mills in order to participate as a low wealth system. The program presently says that. That's not a change in what we're presently doing, and provides an extra match for those systems that levy more than that. So if you're levying 14, 15, 16, we'll give you an extra match. However, the state also puts in safeguards to prevent overbuilding by requiring systems receiving this funding to build according to a prototypical specification. We decided in this House and Senate years ago that we'd have prototypical designs. You know, this building's good, let's build it, you know, instead of having your own architect. But we found that a building that would work in South Georgia, you couldn't put up in the mountains of North Georgia, so no systems ever use that. But we still say they got to use the specifications that are prototypical. You know, that size of classrooms, number of classrooms, media center, whatever.
Thank you very much. Also, Mr. Chairman, indulge me for a minute. I want to thank personally, publicly before this committee, thank Representative Coleman. He put this clock on the wall, this beautiful clock. He comes in once a week, winds it up, and when this room was redone, and we are grateful as a state for what you've done.
We're proud of that clock. That clock is the one, like the one that hung here 100-something years ago. We found it in New York, and you're right, our club, we have a clock. We restored that thing, and it was completely renovated again this summer, and we're proud of it, and the one in the governor's office, too. So thank you for that. Yes, sir.
Senator Cowser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Coleman, I have a question for you.
Yes.
Page 10 of your bill, section 10, the part that deals with new funding for new buildings where you're closing an existing building.
All right, Lynn, can you want to comment on that? If you don't, may I, Mr. Chairman, allow?
Okay, sure.
Looks like there used to be some pretty extensive requirements if you're going to shut down an existing school and spend money to build a new one. Can you explain to us the change there?
Yes, sir. Essentially, the requirements there were non-binding. There have been several systems that, because of financial constraints, have closed buildings where they had enough space in other buildings to put everybody together, and it was a cost-saving issue for them. And there were complaints in neighborhoods, and there was a referenda, but the building was still closed. The practical application of this was that there was a cost for a referenda. It got everybody all worked up, but nothing ever happened as a result of it necessarily, and therefore we're just trying to eliminate that. You do still have to have your hearings. You still have to hear your community and let them have their say, but we're eliminating the required referenda if there's a petition.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, what's the pleasure of the committee on House Bill 760? A motion by Senator Hooks, do pass. Second, Senator Sims. Any other questions or comments on House Bill 760? Assume you're ready to vote. All in favor of passing out of the Appropriations Committee House Bill 760, please raise your hand. Haven't counted. I assume we still have a quorum. I hope. We'll know here in a minute. Okay, and all opposed. Let's have one opposed. Okay. All right, very good. Bill passes 760.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'd like, if I may, Freddie Sims, Senator Miller, and Senator Tippins are members, as well as Senator Hill are members of this commission. So I appreciate the fine work they did also. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We're going to call Senate Bill 403, Senator Miller of the 40th. If you'll come up, and this has to do with the school nurse program. You also find, ladies and gentlemen, an amendment in your folder, and I guess that'll be the committee that offers that amendment. Senator Miller, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The current formula for school nurses has historically been funded at a flat amount with no adjustments made for increased students, supplies, or other program costs. And what the study commission has determined that we want to have a formula to fund school nurses based on student counts to allow the formula to grow as needed to meet the needs of an increased student population. And under this bill, what we've done, we've gone to an FTE-based funding formula, so basically basing student count. And at the elementary level, we'll fund one nurse for every 750 kids, and at the other levels, one nurse for every 1,500 kids. And the idea is over a 3-year period, the state will fund 50% of this cost. There'll be no local matching requirement, and the locals can fund above or below this 50% number. What the amendment does, it requires that the money from the state be used for school nurses. The local system can't take the state funds and use it for another purpose. It'll be phased in, as I said, over 3 years. In the 2013 budget, it'll be $3.6 million. By 2015, that will grow to about $10 million. There'll also be in the bill, subject to state funding, grants for supplies for school health nurse programs, as well as a position for coordinator at the state level to make sure these programs are working properly. You know, unfortunately, we live in a world that we've asked our schools to be a lot more than just educators, and student health has been deemed to be appropriate and important, so the state thinks that we need to put our money where our mouth is, for lack of a better term. And that's really the bill.
All right. You have an amendment that adds the, you want to just...
Yes, sir. Like I said, it makes the funds from the state will be used for the school nurse program. They can't be taken and used for another purpose.
Okay. All right. I have a question. Senator Underman, is that your line? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, it says one nurse for every 1,500 FTEs. I was wondering why the larger school systems, like my high schools, can have 3,000 and 4,000 kids, why they would not be funded 2 nurses.
I'm sorry?
Why would they be funded 2 nurses or just one?
Yes, one for every 1,500 children.
So 3,000?
That's what the state funds. Now the locals have to decide what they want. Remember, we're picking up either 40 or 45 or 50% of the cost. So we depend on what the locals do as well. So
But-
it would be funded at that level. That's what we're going to fund at.
Okay, so they would have 2 funded
Yeah.
nurses? Okay, I just want to make sure.
Okay. Other questions? All right. Why don't we, someone make a motion on the amendment first? I have a motion by Senator Underman that the amendment be added to the bill. Have a second on that amendment? Okay. All in favor of amending Senate Bill 403 with amendment AM 331150, please raise your hand. Okay. We barely have a quorum, so everybody please vote. Okay. All right. All opposed? Okay. Okay. All right. Amendment passes. Is that correct? All right. Amendment passes. We'll now vote on the Senate Bill 403 as amended. Have a motion pass. Have a second. Several seconds. Any further discussion? All right. Your pleasure on Senate Bill 403 as amended. Please raise your hand in favor. All right, thank you. And all opposed? Got one opposed. Okay. Okay, I believe that we had enough votes to pass it out of committee. Is that correct, Madam Secretary? All right, Senate Bill 403 moves out of committee as amended. With one more bill, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to make it. So thank you for your indulgence. Also by Senator Miller, it's Senate Bill 404. You have a committee sub in your folder. That sub is LC 334630S. So Senator Miller.
Okay, Senate Bill 404 deals with professional learning, and the Study Commission recommends providing funding for the Department of Education to develop professional learning training centered on statewide strategic initiatives. This system would allow the department to take a statewide approach on areas of concern. For example, in our state, grade level reading. One of the things we talked about a lot in the Study Commission is one of the keys of a good school is school leadership. So we've expanded the professional development not just to be teachers, but also for administrators. While recommendations on expenditures, controls, and increased flexibility will be part of our final recommendations, we want to make sure that the funds for professional learning are going to be linked directly to student achievement. In fiscal year 2014 is when we'll start this. We'll put $7 million into this. And I would tell you, if you have some time, go out and visit the Academy at Gwinnett County for principal leadership. It's a very eye-opening experience. They've used a business model, and what they've been able to do to train principals over a couple of years is pretty phenomenal. And the state is going to try to do similar type action. But I commend Renee, or Senator Oneman, your particular county for what they've done out there. And that's the revised standard version at 5 of 11.
Okay, you want to speak to the committee sub, any change between the committee sub and the original bill?
I can't hear you.
The changes between the original bill and the committee sub?
Yes, what we've done, we originally were going to start this in 2013, but in the budget, the governor has put $1.6 million for reading mentors in the budget, and so we've taken that from for the original bill, and that's the change. So that's why we're implementing it as of 2014.
Okay. All right. Questions from the committee on the substitute to Senate Bill 404? All righty. What's your pleasure, committee? Motion by Senator Underman do pass. Do we have a second? Senator Sims, Senator Carter. Other discussion on Senate Bill 404? All right, all in favor of Senate Bill 404 passing out as by